Hey there, you're listening to Sport Coach Education, the podcast that explores coach training in all its various forms. I'm your host, Liz Byam. Let's get started. Well, welcome. So glad to have you today.
I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm going to say you're my highest caliber guest as of yet.
Fantastic. I'm certainly happy to join your podcast and help any way that I can.
Awesome. Why don't you start by introducing yourself and telling us about your athlete and coaching journey and what you're doing now?
All right. So my name is Dr. Peter McGahey, and I'm currently a teaching assistant professor at West Virginia University, and also do some coach development work for U.S. soccer. And my athlete journey, I would say, as I had a typical parental start to sport, where my parents coached me in my local park. My parents ran my local soccer league. I played for a variety of other of my friends' dads in a variety of other sports, baseball, basketball, but soccer became my passion and my sport, for better or for worse. And then I played that all the way up until the collegiate level at the University of Denver. And then at that point, my coaching career had begun. I had started coaching a little bit in college as a part-time job. And then as I finished my first undergraduate degree, I realized that I had no interest in sitting behind a desk. And I really wanted to help people become the best versions of themselves. Didn't quite know it at that time. But what that then fast forwards through is a career of where I've coached at the high school level. I've coached men's and women's college soccer. I've coached at the Olympic development level in terms of youth soccer. And then now I find myself in the space where I basically ended my college coaching journey about 5 years ago, and then have stepped into the professional space of coach development, educator development. And then I'm doing my coaching pursuits now in the adaptive pathway. So I work a little bit with athletes with an organization called CP Soccer. So that's athletes with cerebral palsy, traumatic brain injury, or stroke. And I'm also the current assistant coach for our U.S. power soccer team. So that's athletes that play soccer in power wheelchairs.
You sound like a very busy person.
I am probably, Liz, a little bit too busy, but yes.
I just like your colleague, Kristen. When she tells me all she does, I'm like, ooh, Kristen
Yeah.
Dykenbach. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Kristen's fantastic.
So you're absolutely the kind of person I want to talk to in the coach education realm. I did see your undergrad degree was unrelated, as you just mentioned, but then you pursued a pretty academic pathway to coach
Yeah.
education, which is unusual. Wouldn't you say?
I guess I would just share is it's sort of every pathway is unique. I think it's a place where it adds, or I think it is, sort of unique is sort of where what your perspective is. I guess mine was just sort of, how do I continue to fill in the boxes with my natural curiosity? So my first degree was in communications and a minor in business, a fabulous liberal arts thing that I'm not sure I ever would have gotten a job in, but that's okay. That was fine. I then went back and got a second undergraduate degree because I decided I was going to teach and coach. And the irony about teaching and coaching is sort of that's where the journey now. The irony is that's where I went right after my first undergraduate degree, and I got an undergraduate degree in physical education, K through 12 physical education. But I came to a point where at that degree needed to do student teaching or take a full-time job in coach development or coaching. So I decided it was a place where I did not really want to pay to do somebody else's work for 6 months. And I decided then at that moment, I was going to pursue basically coaching and coach development as a career pathway without really knowing at all what I was doing. And then several years goes by and experiences. And then I decided that I needed more academic background and more understanding in coaching, more understanding in coach development. So I pursued a master's degree at Ball State University in sport coaching. I needed that, I think, as a bus ticket to get into college coaching, because again, masters are required at a lot of university levels. So then I finished that degree and then started my journey as a college coach. And about year 2 at Minnesota State Mankato, they started a educational leadership program, an EDD. I was good fortune and timing allowed me to be in their second cohort of students in that program. And then that's where I just decided that then in terms of pursuing educational leadership and my doctorate degree was the right step for myself, for my family at the time. It would provide options and growth opportunities beyond the coaching realm, which has turned out to be exactly the case. And that then allowed me to now pursue sort of the academic background to support the practical experiences that I had coaching. So then fast forward again, where you all this wraps back up is what I'm doing now is teaching and coaching. I'm teaching others how to be coaches in terms of coach development. And now I am coaching in the adaptive pathway with athletes to help them be the best versions of themselves. So it's interesting how your goals in one point take a career path to get there.
Absolutely. That second undergrad degree in physical education, but you knew already you wanted to pursue coaching. Did you go the physical education path because there wasn't a coaching major available?
Yeah, I mean, so the short answer to that question is yes. Sort of available where I was, when I was there, where
Yeah.
I was there. I think it was a place where I always pushed my education experiences, both that second undergraduate degree and then even my doctorate degree. I always pushed it through the lens of coaching and the
Mhm.
lens of sport. But that was more sort of my independence as a learner, as opposed to necessarily the drive of the program. So I think in terms of had a sport coaching undergraduate degree been available to me, yeah, I would have been the person that would have wanted to take that.
I'm totally on board with this. I see that it's an EDD in educational leadership, but your dissertation was on coaching.
Correct.
So it was kind of like a workaround. And I find myself in the same position getting a PhD in sport management. And my focus is on coaching. And sometimes I
Right.
have or coach education rather, I have to tweak it and present it in a slightly management realm to get approval since it is a sport management major. So, what are your thoughts on a doctorate of coaching like you can get in England? What would
Or even again, even in here where we're at WVU in terms of our coaching and teaching science PhD, I think those things in terms of pursuing the craft of coaching, the profession of coaching, the reality is we look at that as a profession. I mean, you open up your internet and sport coaching is going to come up. You're going to talk about in some places, our American football coaches are the highest paid public person in certain states, right? Like, so I think the reality, Liz, is that the profession of sports coaching is well established. I think the interesting piece is that how well established it is as a career path is not necessarily paralleled by academic programs that support movement into that. And I think an EDD or a doctorate in coaching makes sense in terms of people who are interested in studying it from an academic sense, from a professional growth sense. So again, for me, it's a place I think that makes sense. I think it's a place is that a PhD, is that an EDD? I don't know. We could talk about how that would sort of cut, but I think it's a place where the field itself would support those types of degrees, both undergraduate, master's degrees, and then again, a culminating experience in terms of a terminal degree as a doctorate degree.
why don't you think there are any at this? I know West Virginia is I want to say the closest, and I know like it kind of comes down to semantics, like what the doctorate is called, but
Yes.
yeah, it's not strictly a coaching, a degree in coaching or
No,
coach.
so why the hesitation? Now you're asking for speculation and years of
Yeah.
politics and well beyond my sort of
Yeah.
he's but I'm happy to, right? I just think there's a place of where the challenge I think is if you look at the role of a coach, what the coach is and does and how people view those coaches is I think it's a place where it's just really easy to sort of say, oh yeah, and you need something else. You need a different type of study, you need a different type of pursuit. Well, I don't agree with that. I just think it's a place where how the profession of sport coaching has been sort of captured and encapsulated in our society has led it to sort of be this you don't need an academic degree to get it. You don't need an academic degree to do it, which I think is sort of counterintuitive to the growth of people, the growth of athletes, the growth of sport. But I just think it's a place of how societally we've looked at and approached this particular career field and youth sport and let's say sport in general. And I think part of the challenge societally is that you really have sport at multiple levels. You have
Mhm.
professional sport, which is sort of this entertainment base. You have now sort of collegiate sport, which is sort of in this really strange transition to is it professional? Is it not? It is. But are we holding on to this sort of illusion of amateurism? Then you have now sort of now the, let's call it the machine of youth sport that now feeds all these other elements in society. And I think it's a place where the coach's role within each of those segments. And then again, you can obviously stack on beyond professional sports, elite sport, right? In terms of the Olympic national team pieces. I think the challenge is that most people's introduction to sport is in youth sport, which is a primarily, let's say in a really overly generalized sort of way, volunteer based, lack of coach training, education and standards are sort of a little all over the place. What's the philosophy? What's the mission of the organization? But hey, the kids are playing sports and sports are good. Well, I think that the machine of youth sport has a tendency now to drive lots of other things. So if lots of volunteer coaches are coaching at sort of these younger ages, and whatever coaching you get is okay, it's not, by the way. Let me just go
Yeah.
on record of saying it's not. But I think that that's places that can skews people's sort of understanding that, hey, it would be really important if somebody was coaching 8-year-olds that they have this amount of training. If they're coaching this age of players, that they have this level of training. And I think, and then in that place, Liz, is then the academic organizations would support that. But I think it's a place of where the view of sport coaching is it a real career in and of itself? And if it's not, then okay, then you don't need an academic program to do that. You need it to be sort of, and I think that we're all fighting that challenge of how do you continue to support to promote the career field of sport coaching as a general path. I think one of the other challenges with it as an academic degree, particularly at the lower, let's say at the entry point, the undergraduate level, or even the master's degree, a little bit is in order to be, most people would say to be a sport coach, you need a sport that is an inherent, like there's a part I think sometimes as even we sit around as academics and we talk about sport coaching and we talk about the importance of how to coach,
Hmm.
and we love it and it's passionate and I could talk about it all day. However, that also is coupled with a what are you coaching? So I think the challenge becomes is from an academic standpoint is how do you offer a broad enough program to capture how, but all of the what's.
No, absolutely. Even my 17-year-old daughter was like, "Wait, I don't get it. How can you have one degree in coaching when there's so many different sports to be
Yes.
coached?" And I guess that is one of the many differences between, you know, physical education is an accepted profession, physical education teachers with all levels of degrees. I mean, you have your elementary versus high school, but it is just a much smaller spread than the wide world of all different sports.
I think what the interesting part is I think it's a place of where if you look at the idea is that coaching isn't teaching and teaching isn't coaching. There's similarities, but I think that there's clear differences. I think the challenge is that there is a stigma with sport coaches that they just get branded as physical education. Oh, you're just a teacher. No, it's more complex than that. It's more challenging. It's different. It's not right. It's not wrong. It's just different. And I think it's a place, Liz, where how we capture the idea of the what and allow people to explore their own what's within the confines of traditional academics. That's a challenge. I think that is a challenge that again, in terms of sport coaching degrees and those things, that is really challenging. Because again, it's a place where does a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old know they want to be a sport coach? And do they know what they want to coach? Perhaps, right? So again, I just think it presents a real challenge.
Well, I see it as those doctoral level folks are the ones who would be studying these issues and hopefully coming up with solutions. That would be my aim, not necessarily, and also, I guess, but not necessarily going back into their one specific sport and improving on it. But in your case, you have the education. I do want to talk about U.S. soccer because it comes up over and over in my podcast interviews. Even I interviewed my middle school teacher
Yes.
who has been coaching for 40 years, like at the high school level. And he's
Right.
primarily a basketball coach, but he ended up talking about US soccer's coach education program and how it's basically the gold standard. So I definitely want to talk about that. But I want to hear I guess I ask people with less knowledge. what the difference is between coaching and teaching. So I would love for you to explain the difference.
Yeah, I guess for me is I think coaching has an element of where you teach as a coach. I think a teacher in a traditional education setting has real responsibilities and those things that are unique to that career. I think that's the separation, at least for me, is that again, coaching in essence is that you're helping an individual and a team in a particular sport at a particular time to grow, to develop, to become the best versions of themselves. I think as a teacher, I've never spent a lot of time comparing that, but
Okay.
I don't believe that that's necessarily what a teacher is responsible for because a teacher is teaching all of these subjects, where a coach, in essence, is honing in on one particular sport, one particular time, one particular team, and helping the individuals grow, develop, and become the best versions of themselves.
Like a more of a setting difference, I would say, but you would agree there's a lot of teaching in coaching.
Correct.
It often comes up, do teachers make the best coaches, especially when we're talking about in a volunteer realm? Like I have a staff of 20 volunteer dads who coach mountain biking, and the ones who are teachers always stand out. Those tend to be my better coaches, kind
Well,
of regardless of mountain bike experience, but they understand how to talk to kids and
I th I guess I would share is I think that the similarity, Liz, between yes, there's similarities. I think it's for me, it's a place of where they understand there's a place where there's a component of a similarity between the interpersonal relationships that are required in order to help somebody move outside their comfort zone. That you have to they have to feel like that you have to care about them, that you have to feel like that you have to know them, you have to have a relationship where you can support and you can challenge them. And I think that so those are some of the things that teachers do on a regular basis. I've got to support my students. I've got to challenge my students. I just think it's a place where, again, I think how to communicate with certain age groups. Absolutely. Again, my daughter works with youngsters, like toddlers, like 2 years old.
okay.
Not everybody can communicate with a 2 year old, right? Like so, I think it's not everybody can communicate with a 15 year old. Not everybody can communicate with a 13 year old. I think that there's also this place of where with coaching we have a real tendency to say coach and believe that that person would be an expert or the best coach in any environment, in any case, in any place. I think that there's an overgeneralization of coaching that I think hurts us within the field. Meaning that to say is that just because you're a professional coach doesn't mean I would be really good with 7 year olds. Or just because I could coach 20 year olds doesn't necessarily mean that I could work with high school or a middle school athlete. I think that there's contextual knowledge and contextual experience that's important in terms of knowledge about how to coach, but also what you're coaching in those particular age groups as a whole. Because I think one of the challenges we have as a coach is that we have a tendency is whatever the next level is doing, we want to do it at this level.
In teaching as well, really.
Yes. So, and again, that and I would say is that that's a lack of familiarity from my part about teaching. I wouldn't want to comment on that because I wouldn't know because I basically once I got to the point where I was going to need to be a teacher, I sort of stepped back and said, hey, I want to be a coach.
It's funny, I kind of went the opposite way. My undergrad degree is in exercise science, but after having my first kid, I found myself becoming a teacher.
Right.
So I guess I was fortunate. I skipped the student teaching part of it. In New Jersey, I went the alternate route program. So I got into it in a way that, yeah, I didn't have those negatives that you were required to go through.
Yeah. I mean, again, and I think it's just a place that those are the requirements and standards that were required, and I thought that that was a place of that wasn't a hoop I was willing to jump through. So
Right.
I went in and pursued my opportunity to help and support others in sort of a different way.
No, absolutely. And that also reminds me of US soccer because it is a robust certification process. I know it is a barrier that some people aren't willing to, hoop they're not willing to jump through. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It gets people who really want to do it. And I guess the same thing could be said for the physical education teachers. There is a training requirement, and that is not a bad thing in my opinion.
No, and I think again, I think Liz, if you just go back to like this idea about with volunteer coaches, the
I was
idea
going to
that
bring it up, so I'm glad you did.
you go back with volunteer coaches, what they do in their real life or who they are is going to impact how they volunteer, how they show up.
Absolutely.
Also, their previous experience in sport is going to be their socialization of what they think a coach should do or be is going to have a large impact in terms of how they coach. So somebody who's a teacher as a volunteer coach who interacts with youth or interacts with people on a regular basis to challenge them, to teach them, to recognize what their needs are in terms of who they are and who the person is in front of them. I think that's a place of where we could learn a lot from that as coaches, right? Like we can learn a lot in that environment in terms of taking a more athlete centered or player centered approach, however you would want to phrase that. So again, I think it's a place where we recognize that my mentor always says is that people are not empty vessels, right? They don't show up to us totally empty with nothing, with nothing. So I think a good volunteer coaches who care about kids, care about the people who are in front of them and are willing to meet the players where they are or their athletes where they are gonna have positive experiences. And again, I think if you connect that back to teachers as example, teachers do that on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would say most of what you described would also be like a social worker. If you were a volunteer coach, but a social worker in your day job, you would absolutely bring those skills. What about the actual learning? Not necessarily for volunteer coaches, but you want skills to be acquired, and telling somebody to do something is not always, doesn't mean it's going to happen. So I think understanding of learning is also extremely helpful.
I think this is I guess my own personal opinion here is that this element of learning, how we learn, how we set up learning, how we facilitate learning as coaches, I think is the next. It's a frontier that we've dove into, that we've looked at. I just think it's a place of where person I think that is how are we learning as coaches, but also how are we also facilitating learning for the people who are in our teams and our athletes. I think that's the place, Liz, where when you look at sort of how we're continuing to grow the field, how we're continuing to differentiate the profession, I think this piece about facilitating learning is really important because the most effective learning environments create the best players, right? Ineffective learning environment also sometimes creates good players because the players are driven to learn. But you have some really negative environments, some negative learning environments that really dissuade a lot of people from participating in sport and wanting to participate in sport so they leave. But the concept I think about learning is the place. And it connects back is what would we need to be pursuing in academic degrees, helping facilitate learning? What is learning? How are you setting up learning for the individual? I think is really important. I think it's a place of where, again, as it relates to learning, how are you fostering natural curiosity? People want to play sports. People
Yeah.
love to ride. People love to ride bikes. People want to ride bikes down mountains really fast. Some are going to do it better than others. Some people want to play soccer and they want to try to play it as well as they can. But I think it's this place about allowing exploration of sport, exploration of lots of things. What are you passionate about? Where do your curiosities lie? Once you have individuals who are curious and passionate, now we have an opportunity, I think, to help and walk alongside them in the learning journey, not necessarily take over the learning journey. And I also think that's a place of where sort of a myth of coaching is the coach has got to have all the answers. A coach has got to know all of the solutions to every one of the problems that could possibly come up and all of the thousands of ones that you don't know are going to come up. Instead of taking the approach of like, wait a second, this is a learning environment. I'm going to facilitate learning and growth for my players in a way, but I also now have to be a co-learner with them when we're participating. So I'm really I can't agree with you enough that the concept of learning and how that is integrated into coaching and integrated into coach education or coach development, whatever you would want to phrase it, to help us be as coaches understanding principles or basis or philosophies of learning. That's really important.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, as the coach, as a problem solver, you also want to teach your athletes to problem solve. Is the gist of one of the parts you were saying there? Are there any learning scientists in your department at West Virginia? I had not really thought of that before. I have an EDS in design of learning environments, so it always makes me happy when somebody brings up the importance of learning environments. While I think it's important to have, so so one of the things I'm studying is who is teaching these coach education programs in colleges, and
Yes.
how many people have a degree, a terminal degree in coaching? It's almost none. I mean,
Right.
you have your workarounds, which again, I'm all for. I applaud. But there's also something to be said for having a variety of different coaching is such a multifaceted profession for those
Yes.
people making it a profession that, you know, it's probably a good thing to have people coming at it from different angles. Like the psychology angle is usually covered, but yeah, the learning science piece because that is a field, obviously. So bringing those folks in, I think along the lines of what you were saying, I think that would probably be beneficial.
Well, I would agree with you, Liz, wholeheartedly. I mean, we talk a lot about the environment. I mean, again, if you turn on and you just go into mainstream professional sports because it's easy to sort of find that information. They talk about the culture, they talk about the team, they talk about what happens in the building, they talk about the environment with their teammates. Well, guess what? They're talking about the environment, right? And there's a component about how are they learning? How are they learning the plays, the networks, the this is that, whatever? How are they learning to take care? That's environment. That's environmental design in terms of what are you creating? How are you creating it? And your environment could support learning or it could hinder learning based on just how you set it up and how you engage the learner at what level. So if you teach a 5-year-old like you're going to teach a 15-year-old, you teach a 15-year-old like you're going to teach a 25-year-old, you got a problem like as a coach. But I think that's the place of where, but the common thread there is the environment that you create and the facilitation of learning. I think again, it's really I think it's really powerful, and I think this is where for me coaching is heading in terms of better understanding of these pieces
In what way? Why do you think it's headed that way?
because I think it's a place where I guess this is now my own coffee in the morning on a Wednesday thought process is the reality is the world is becoming more data driven, right? More data driven.
Mhm.
We're able to now get data on absolutely everything. You can plug your team's play in, you can put performances in. The computer can now spit all these things out. Well, the two things that are so if you look at that, the data and the analysis of what your team or what your athletes are doing is one component. The next piece is going to be how do you communicate? How do you have interpersonal relationships with the people that you are leading? Under that is learning. How are they learning? How are you communicating learning? And how are you learning, which is now communication with yourself. So, this idea about now learning and
Mhm.
to set up a learning environment, that's sort of the place I think is technology can't do that.
Absolutely.
Technology is never going to be able to do that. Like they're never like the idea about supporting somebody when they're down or believing them when they're now there or giving them a little bit of a challenge when they need a little bit of a challenge. That's going to be where the individual and the human being who's coaching the other human beings are going to become really really valuable. And again, how do I help somebody learn or how do I help somebody grow? How do I help somebody process all of this information that is available to them and connect with them with their identities and with their insecurities and with their confidence and like so that really is where the sport coach I think and the coach becomes really critical and has nothing to do with X's and O's, nothing,
No, yeah.
zero, right? Like
None of what
all
you described, yeah.
none of that it's encapsulated in it, but nothing really has to do with that. And again, I can learn X's and O's along the way if I have some of these foundations of how to coach and how to go about that in what the modern coach is going to need to be able to do.
That is a question that I've asked. I should ask it more often. Which do you think is easier to teach somebody? Would you rather somebody come in knowing all the X's and O's and you have to then teach them the soft skills, interpersonal skills and the learning or the other way around?
I don't know, like the term, like I'm not even sure what the term soft skill is, to be honest. Right. Like I just think that there's a place of like I think let's call it the professional skills that you have to have. Like there's a professional place. And again, I think with the US soccer courses, you're talking about teaching professional skills because it's embedded in sort of there's a clear what.
Okay.
When you're teaching more general sport coaching, Liz, you're really teaching the inter and intrapersonal skills. Like intra, how am I leading myself? How am I reflect? How do I have a reflective practice? How do I become an evidence-based coach? How do I now have emotional intelligence? How do I have self awareness? All of these really things that are really important now to understand about yourself before you get into a place of where now you're stepping up and leading others. Then you have the interpersonal communication about how are you communicating with others? How are you allowing ownership of the learner? How are you now connecting with their own natural curiosity? How are you supporting them? How are you guiding them? How are you challenging them? So the idea is I just think it's a mix of where ultimately the sport coach has to have all of it.
Mhm.
And I think that that's what makes it a little bit tricky, right? Like because it's a place where is it a place where you could be a really good communicator and a really self-aware human being and have a really hard time is because you just don't know enough about what it is you're teaching. Yes, 100%. However, if you are not a nice human being and you're emotionally unintelligent and you're not terribly socially aware and you're really communicating in a really sort of inappropriate way a lot of times, you can know a lot about sport and you're not going to be any more effective, or you're probably actually going to be less effective because at least a person who can communicate and be kind can make people feel good.
So which do you think is easier to correct or easier to teach somebody how to make up for those deficits that they show up with?
I wouldn't categorize it as easier. I would say it depends.
Okay.
And it depends on the learner. So it depends on now who is coming now and how are they approaching this idea about continuing to grow and to learn. I think that that's also this idea about continuing to grow and to learn is another myth that is embedded within sport is that we feel like talent is natural and players are naturally talented, they're naturally gifted. I think that that cup of the talent myth in essence overflows to coaching, that we feel like coaches are naturals, that we feel like that the coaches have all of the answers. Because what we see in the media is coaches who are really polished and really good and really have been around for a long time. So that myth that coaching is something that you just innately have and innately do.
Yeah.
Mm. So because again, if that myth exists, when people come into academic programs or meet you or meet me as an educator to help them develop as a coach, if society, the myth is that you got to have all the answers as a coach and you should know this already, then how they approach their education it's really hard because their willingness to engage in learning is influenced. So that could be the person who it's a professional domain issue, meaning they don't know enough about their what, but they have all of these other really good skills. Or it could be somebody who has really good professional domain knowledge and lacking in these other areas. It's about really, I think, about how do you create it back to this creation of environment. How do you create an environment that can now welcome those learners in. And we have to, as educators, do a good job of meeting them where they are because everybody's a little bit different, just like our players. Everyone is a little bit different and everybody's going to need a little bit of a different approach to that. What it comes down to is how open and understanding do they recognize that all of this, the craft of becoming a sports person or the craft of becoming a sports coach is something that you can grow and develop.
No, you've definitely you've said it, but not explicitly. It comes down to how willing a person is to learn.
Yes.
That like you could make up for deficits in any area, multiple areas, if you're willing to learn.
Yes, correct.
How.
So the willingness of the learner to change and to grow, I think is really important. I think sometimes as an educator, as a developer, we have to help motivate, we have to help inspire, we have to help guide, we have to challenge. I think though is there's approach of where if we meet anyone who's engaged education, anyone, if they've engaged it, whether it be sort of in a formal academic setting, they've signed up for a degree program, or they've now signed up for sort of a professional degree or a professional certificate, whatever, a non-traditional path or a professional pathway, if they've signed up for that, somewhere there's a willingness to learn. How we find it as the developer, as the educators, that's our challenge, I think.
I love that because yes, at some level, and there big people show up at multiple levels of the want and the willingness for sure.
Liz, it could be the volume of the want and the willingness could be really close to not at all. But but they've still come there. So now what is our opportunity now to do those things? I think the places where again, this may go back to answer your question in terms of my priorities. However, it's where then we meet them.
Mhm.
It's where we meet them in terms of now, I think the place where we have to meet more adult learners, let's call it an adult learning setting, and even individuals, again, I guess I would share is we have to meet them with where they are and what are their needs. If we do that and we approach that way, I think you have an opportunity to positively influence and positively shape others through educational experiences. Not everybody has to have the highest volume and say, hey, I want to become a sport coach and I'm going to go get a PhD, or I'm going to get on the mountain bike pathway and I'm going to become the best mountain bike coach. I'm going to get pursue all of the certificates or those things again with soccer, with basketball or football. But I think it's just a place of where if we meet the learner and can help recognize that where they are is okay and it's not a deficiency, I think that's a place of where we'll have a much better opportunity as developers and educators, because I think people have this inherent piece of where they feel like their performance gap is instead of accepting where they are and aspiring to where they want to go, they see where they're not and they say, that's too hard. I can't do that. And instead of saying, well, where I am is totally okay because it's based on my experiences and where I am. And now I can learn a little bit to try to close those gaps about where I would like to go in the future.
No, that would be an amazing lesson for a coach to learn, and definitely something that should be passed on to their athletes because athletes are in the
Yes.
similar situation.
And I think, Liz, as again, I'm really drawn to that statement from you, really drawn in by that, because I think sometimes is that where we recognize that some of the experiences that we're helping as we teach coaches to coach and they go through this process of self-assessment, where are they? How do they want to get better, a little bit better at something, right? It could be whatever they want to get better at.
Mhm.
How do they close that gap between where they are presently and where they would aspire to be in the future? That's where they're meeting their athletes.
Yeah.
That is the landscape of coaching, where you're at presently and where you'd like to be in the future. And how do we help close that gap a little bit at a time? Because what I share a lot with people is that, or with coaches, is that the idea is the magic of coaching happens in the gap between where you are and where you'd like to be. That's
Yeah,
the
no,
magic. That's the
that
magic.
ties in.
That is the magic. But that's also for us as coaches, and it's for our players. So
Mhm.
how we approach this idea about where I am presently is very likely how I'm going to approach that with my players.
Yeah, no, that seems like the perfect place to start with coach education now that we've mentioned it. I want you to seem like a perfect segue to talk more about U.S. soccer.
Yes.
And I guess maybe could you give me an overview of the program, multi-tiered, or maybe I could tell you my my basic understanding as a non-soccer person. You have to start at the young age level
Yes.
and with smaller competitive like go ahead.
Yeah, small, it's no problem. So I would share is it's a pathway that has sort of basically now matches the ages and stages of players. So the idea is we have a grassroots program that now captures sort of our littlest grassroots players in a participation environment, and that those grassroots licenses run from, let's say, coaching 4-year-olds up to 12-year-olds, and the playing formats then then the athletes would experience in that from 4v4, 7v7 to 9v9. So the variety of game formats that would then be matched up with that. Those are approachable courses for the most part in terms of some of them are online, some of them are in person. They're achievable for the coach who is at various stages within their career. So some people could come at those as they would want to be a professional coach, and then they would want, or they could be a volunteer coach. They would all
Okay.
be in. They would all be in those grassroots pathways.
And is that where most of your volunteers top out?
For the most part. And then again, then you have sort of the culmination of the grassroots license, which would be called the D license. And the D license would be focused on sort of bringing all of the grassroots experience together in a culminating experience. And some organizations throughout the country have a D license as a requirement now to coach at certain levels. So there's
Okay.
some coaching licensing standard that now is integrated into the U.S. soccer pathway. And then after the D license, then you move into what I would say is the next level is you have the C license, the B license, the A license, and then the pro course. So let me sort of go course by course. The C license becomes sort of the introduction and foundational coach course for the 11, so the adult version of the format. And it's focused on players who are U13 to U15. The C license, in essence, is a crossroads for a lot of people. And that's a place where that course itself sees a lot of the coaches, because again, the coach who's now coached in middle school or high school for a long time, the C course may be their culminating license. It may be their final license. in terms of just interest, time, and those things, because the C course is a 4-month course. So it's like a university academic course over a period of time. But you also have other individuals in the C course who are aspiring professional coaches who would like to move on with their career. So that's a place of where it moves from the grassroots into the D, into the foundational C course of the 11v11. And then from there, after the C, it moves on to the B. And the B license is again 11, focused on those similar age groups 13 to 16. But now we're challenging the coaches with a little bit more information as they would move from sort of a more of a participation pathway into more of a pathway where these players are what I would call an aspirational pathway, where players in that environment are now maybe aspiring for different things. They want to play in their high school team, they want to play in a professional team, they want to play in an international team. You're capturing some of those things in the B license.
So is that like a travel soccer coach?
Yeah, a travel soccer coach would be like at the C or above. Like
Okay.
somebody who at the B would be somebody who might be in an MLS Next program or an NWSL academy program or another one of the professional academy programs. That person who would be at the B license is a 6-month course. That would be somebody who would be really on a professional pathway as an individual to be it would be or aspiring to be a professional coach.
What about collegiate coaches?
Collegiate coaches sort of fall a lot of places on the spectrum, and sort of the next places is that come now is then the A license then is sort of the culminating license again for the vast is the terminal license for the majority of people, and I'll explain why in a second. And that is broken down by context. So you have a youth course, you have an A senior course, and the senior course has the opportunity for have individuals who'd be coaching in the college environment would be there. But you're going to have college coaches who are now on the pathway, who are in the C, in the B, who are moving towards their A license. So the A course is again sort of the terminal license. That's a year-long course in terms of a very heavy practical experiential course that's embedded in your own environment. And then again, your context, whether that be senior players or college players, because they fall more under the senior players, or youth players, we differentiate that context to now increase that learning. And then the next license above that would be the pro license, but that would be exclusively for individuals who would be working in a professional environment.
Is it required to have a license to coach in college?
No,
Okay. I was gonna say it would be the only sport that did require it.
no. And I think that's a place where, again, the if I just go back on my own journey and pathway is I had in my career, I was an A licensed coach with lots of experience, and I was not getting looked at as a college coach at all until I earned a master's degree. And then I got a master's degree, and then those jobs opened up, which again, I think is I'm not sure necessarily that's quite best, the best path, but that is more practical. Is it a place where the licenses are now more recognized within the hiring cycles in the outline of those jobs? Yes. Is it recognized that that training from U.S. Soccer or otherwise or other certificates would be supportive of a coach who's moving into that realm? Yes. Is it required? No.
Hmm. And this system you described, how long has your soccer had that?
Wow. I mean, basically, in terms of what we've outlined now, in terms of grassroots to pro, this has been decades in terms of
Okay.
how it's been implemented. It's gone through different versions and different
Mhm.
renditions, what it's categorized, but this has been a long serving program.
And what's your knowledge of other sports programs and certifications?
I would say is I guess it was not as extensive as U.S. Soccer, just in terms of where I'm landing. But again, I think that other organizations like USA Baseball is doing some stuff. USA Football is now moving into some places where they're looking at coaching education, helping those things out. Other sports have varieties of certifications. USA Tennis is doing a really good job. Hockey is another one that has a really, really comprehensive one. And I think actually, again, I know I appreciated your compliment at the very beginning where you felt like US soccer was the gold standard. I think that
Hockey.
we're aspiring to that. My feeling would be USA hockey is the gold standard.
Interesting. I'm gonna have to look into that.
From that, just in terms of how hockey has a lot of the pieces that I think a lot of other organizations, US soccer included, faces ongoing challenges that USA hockey has crossed some bridges to do some really powerful things in coaching education in terms of how they're structuring it, how they've set it up, how they made it athlete centered. I think USA hockey is doing a fantastic job.
I am going to have to find somebody to talk to me about that.
I would recommend Ken Martell.
Okay.
Ken Martell, I believe, is the senior education director for USA Hockey. They've done a
Nice.
fabulous job.
Tell me about your role as a coach educator with US Soccer. Like, what do you
So
teach specific courses or do you more develop content? What's your role?
yes. So I work primarily at the C license in terms of that piece, in terms of the curricular development and oversight of the and looking at the pathway. That includes supporting the educators who are there and supporting the curricular development. So that means I serve as an educator developer.
Mhm.
That's what we call it at US Soccer in terms of helping the educators. So in my role as a national educator developer, I'm helping the educators who are delivering the C license become, again, the best versions of themselves.
Nice. And what does that look like? Do you work with a team? Do you set the curriculum and move on? Like, how often does it get looked?
So again, I would share is so within the C course, I look after and work with other groups that helps that curriculum to deliver for the student coaches who are taking the C license course. Then, as part of that process, then you're now helping now the educators who are delivering that course be the most impactful educators possible. I work with an educator developer team that now helps work both with now sort of ongoing educators currently in our workforce, and I then work with US Soccer has done a wonderful job the last several years, about 4 years now, in terms of having an educator course where individuals who would like to be educators are now going through a 4-part process to now become educators. And that I as a developer, I support them along that journey.
It sounds so much more organized than a lot of places. That's why I get the warm and fuzzies about US soccer.
Right, I can appreciate that. I think we're doing a good job of now both upscaling our current educator workforce and now what I would say is onboarding now new and aspiring educators to make sure that they are up to speed with sort of learning science, et cetera, adult learning principles, so that now they're entering as an educator with the best opportunity to be successful.
Kind of looking at it broader, again, not my sport. There is buy-in, I'm assuming, at all the grassroots, at all the levels that everyone is requiring this specific line of licensure. Like every no? Okay. Are there competing
Not necessarily, no, not necessarily competing ones. However, there are different varieties of or this idea about licensing standards would makes a lot of intuitive sense, makes a really helps create a good player-centered environment. All of these reasons, Liz, like I can see on your face, like, "Ooh, okay, yes." However, the organizations who then mandate or have those require those standards, that's organization by organization, that's state by state. If we were going to be more universally accepted from a standard, coaches would have to coach at this level, they would have to have this license universally. We don't have that in soccer.
ones?
Hockey is much closer.
Really? Okay, because the people I talk to, it seems like soccer is the one that's there. I mean, I've not talked to
Yeah,
anybody.
and I don't want to discount that we have organizations who do a wonderful job of now having licensing requirements and do a great job of terms of delivering courses, training courses. That's happening all across the country in a really wonderful and powerful way. But if you're really asking for a really finite, your question is really sort of nuanced. I wouldn't want to paint a picture of where, yes, it's not universally accepted across the country that every coach at this age group working with this level player is required to have this license. That level of mandate does not exist at the moment. Would it help? Personal Peter McGahey opinion? Yes. Is that possible? And those things, I understand all the reasons why it would be makes more sense. And I also understand the reasons why it's not logistically happening. But that's the nuance of your question.
Yeah.
Does US Soccer have a great comprehensive coaching education development plan? And yes, 100%. Is it really good? Is it targeted? Is it contextual specific? Is it without a doubt? Is it mandated at every place with every coach? I'm just going to answer it this way. Not yet.
Yeah. Well, it's not like you have authority to make these different clubs mandate the certification, but it seems to me, the word on the street is that there is near universal buy in, that this is a good idea and that coaches should have the license.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who would say, no, you don't need to be licensed or certified. The idea is how are we now having that element of control to really ensure that? I think hockey is the gold standard there.
Yay, hockey.
Absolutely. For sure. So again, I think it's a place where I think the pursuit of it, Liz, this idea about now coaching education as a general concept is a place where I think we have to be more. Again, I think it's a place where there's two things. One, I think is the individuals like yourself, like me, who are now passionate about helping others need to be getting those, helping create the best education pathways possible so people will get into it. And I think continuing to educate the impact of coaching education about how much it improves the player experience and the player's learning environment, massive. More enjoyment, more fun, more belonging, more learning, more participation, more joy from sport. Coaching education is a real key.
I know I asked and you answered, but I wanted to clarify for my own knowledge. There is not another pseudo, not governing body, but nobody else is issuing soccer.
Not licenses, no.
Okay. Are
There
they
is
calling
other
it
organ
certification?
there are other certifications. United Soccer Coaches
Okay.
offer some certifications. Other governing bodies, like the France Federation,
Yeah, yeah.
offers certification. Are there other professional certificates that are out there in the soccer space where coaches can go get educated on periodization, technique? Yes, absolutely.
But
There are other independent organizations there,
I
but
find that more
US.
continuing education.
So continuous education, fair
Yeah.
enough. So again, in terms of the formal, an educational pathways by the governing body, the NGB, it's US Soccer, which is connected with FIFA. And there's no other organization that has the same level as that.
Because I know in other sports, like take cycling, for instance, I mean, we know coach education is fragmented across the
Right.
country, but it is especially painful when it's so fragmented within even one sport.
Yes.
US, USA cycling, it's hard to remember which ones use the A and which ones don't. And
Yes.
you called it USA soccer, which made me feel better because I mess
Yeah.
up all the time. Um,
Yeah.
you quickly corrected yourself, but US, it's because it's US rowing. Anyway, that's my other sport. But
Right.
USA cycling doesn't have anything for mountain biking. It extends you off to a different organization.
Right.
I find that extremely frustrating.
Yes.
I mean, and then you have your non-Olympic sports as well. Okay, I mean that's why I asked because in baseball there are different certifying organizations.
Yes.
So yeah, like it becomes more a business model and a learning centered. I mean, I'm sure they would argue, but and I don't know
I
anything
think that
about them, but
I think that there's a catch. I guess I would just jump into the space and say is there an opportunity for businesses to help people with continuing education?
and again, I think continuing education is different
Yes.
and a good
I think
idea.
the I think the challenge I think is that even with ongoing education costs, there's costs. So like even the idea about now how courses are offered, how they're taught, how they're educated, what the educators have, the requirements for them. I think again, I think Liz, it goes back to you. Why are academic programs? Why are professional degrees? Why are recognizable things for the individuals working in this space so important? So that we understand that they have the correct background and the correct philosophies that are now, or not, that's probably even too far, that they have the background in it and they have explored some of these evidence rationales about why things would look a certain way.
Yeah, I know what started me on my whole journey was really getting to know a coach educator and realizing how little they knew, but were being thrown all across the country to train mountain bike coaches. And I was like, how does this happen? And it just made me want to explore more and more. And it's not always been pleasant what I've found.
No, and I would assume it's been informative.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I just think it's a place of where the field in terms of educators, developers, that's the next step of this. Because again, if you look at now, how do we help coaches develop and get better? Just like coaches help players get better with sort of the players as the center, because the coach wants to help the player be better. So we're a part of that, I think, really important equation. I just think it's a continued growth within the field of where how are we continuing to help others. I think it's a really fascinating time to be in this space.
Is there anything, I don't want to keep you, is there anything else I did not ask about that you would like to share?
No, I appreciate the Liz. It's been a very interesting conversation.
Thank you. I'm glad your Wednesday morning coffee,
Hey, absolutely. More than happy to chat.
awesome. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you're walking away with some new knowledge and something to reflect on. And if this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with a friend or subscribing on your favorite platform. Until next week, take care and thanks for listening to Sport Coach Education.